Sometimes the most broken hearts find their way to each other when they need it most. Behind a barn in Lancaster County, a widowed Amish man discovered a homeless young woman who had given up on trusting anyone. Eli Stoltzfus had been alone for years, his community urging him to remarry while he quietly tended his carpentry and his grief. Hannah had been running for months, sleeping wherever she could find shelter, her past too painful to speak of. When their worlds collided on that cold morning, neither expected the conversation that would follow. His offer wasn't romantic, it was practical, born of mutual need and quiet desperation. She needed a home. He needed a wife. But what started as a simple arrangement between strangers would become something neither had dared to hope for. What happens when two people agree to build a life together without love? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the Pennsylvania hills like a prayer whispered across the valley. Eli Stoltzfus had been awake since 4:30, as was his way, moving through the familiar rhythms of dawn with the precision of a man who had found comfort in routine. At 52, his hands bore the honest calluses of 30 years working. Wood and his beard carried the silver threads that marked him as a man who had lived through seasons of joy and sorrow alike. He stepped from his modest farmhouse into air that carried the scent of hay and the promise of autumn. The barn loomed ahead, its weathered boards a testament to his father's craftsmanship and his own careful maintenance over the years. This was his sanctuary, the place where he shaped oak and maple into furniture that would outlast the hands. That made it, but this morning something was different. Behind the barn, partially hidden by a stack of lumber, lay a figure that made Eli's breath catch in his throat. At first glance, he thought it might be a bundle of old clothes left by some passing traveler. Then he saw the rise and fall of breathing, the tangle of dark hair spilling across a makeshift pillow of feed sacks. A young woman, maybe 25, lay curled against the barn's back wall. Her clothes were worn thin, layers accumulated for warmth rather than fashion. Her face, even in sleep, carried the tension of someone who had learned not to trust the world around her. But it was the quilt, his grandmother's quilt that he kept in the barn for emergencies, that told him she had been here through the night. Eli approached slowly, his boots careful on the gravel. He had seen enough of life to recognize desperation when it found its way to his doorstep. The girl, for that's what she seemed to him, despite whatever years she carried, stirred at his footsteps. Her eyes snapped open with the alertness of prey, scanning for threats before focusing on his face. They were green, those eyes, the color of spring leaves, but shadowed with wariness that spoke of hard experience. "I'm sorry," she said, scrambling to her feet with a speed that suggested practice. I'll go. I'm sorry." Eli raised a hand, the gesture meant to calm rather than stop. "Easy now. You're not in trouble." She clutched a small, battered suitcase to her chest like armor. Everything about her spoke of impermanence, of a life lived in spaces between belonging. Her auburn hair needed washing, and her clothes bore the particular weariness that comes from sleeping rough. But there was dignity in the way she held herself. "I didn't take anything," she said quickly. It was cold." "I can see that." Eli's voice carried the gentle cadence common to his people, unhurried and measured. "What's your name?" She hesitated, as if even that small piece of information was dangerous to share. "Hannah." "Hannah," he nodded, filing the name away like a carpenter noting the grain of new wood. "I'm Eli Stoltzfus. This is my farm." The introduction hung between them, and Hannah shifted her weight, clearly preparing to flee. She had the look of someone who had learned that kindness from strangers often came with expectations she couldn't afford to meet. "You hungry?" Eli asked. The question seemed to surprise her. Her stomach, as if summoned by the suggestion, gave an audible growl that brought color to her cheeks. "I don't have any money," she said, chin raised in defiance of her circumstances. wasn't asking for money. Eli glanced toward his house, where smoke was beginning to rise from the chimney. My neighbor Mary brings fresh bread every few days. Always makes too much for one person. Hannah's eyes followed his gaze to the simple white farmhouse, its windows glowing warm in the early light. Everything about the scene spoke of stability, of roots grown deep. It was a world as foreign to her as the surface of the moon. I should go, she said, but her feet didn't move. Should and need to aren't always the same thing. Eli folded his hands behind his back, a posture that made him seem less imposing despite his height. How long since you ate? She looked away, and he had his answer. The kitchen of Eli's home was simple, as befitted an Amish household, but it radiated the kind of warmth that comes from being truly lived in. The walls were plain white, the furniture handmade and built to last generations. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a small wooden box, polished smooth by years of handling, and beside it a simple wooden cross. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, her suitcase at her feet, ready to grab and run at the first sign of danger. She had agreed to come inside only after Eli had left the door wide open and positioned himself where she could see every move he made. He moved around the kitchen with the competence of a man long accustomed to caring for himself. The bread, as promised, was fresh, and he sliced it thick, spreading it with butter and honey from his own hives. Coffee percolated on the wood stove, filling the room with its rich aroma. Been traveling long? Eli asked as he set a plate before her. Hannah attacked the food with controlled desperation, trying to maintain dignity while her body demanded sustenance. A while, she managed between bites. Where you headed? Anywhere that isn't where I've been? The honesty of it struck Eli silent for a moment. He poured coffee into 2 ceramic mugs, both showing the small imperfections that marked them as handmade, and sat across from her. Trouble following you? Hannah's hand stilled on her coffee cup. What makes you ask that? Woman your age doesn't. Sleep behind barns unless something's chasing her, either bad circumstances or bad people. She studied his face, searching for judgment and finding only patient curiosity. Both, she admitted finally. Eli nodded as if this confirmed something he already suspected. Family? Don't have any. Not anymore. The words carried a weight that spoke of loss beyond simple distance. Eli understood that kind of grief. It lived in the small wooden box on his mantel, in the empty chair across from him at mealtimes, in the silence that filled rooms once brightened by another's presence. My wife passed 3 years ago, he said quietly. Sarah, cancer took her slow and hard. Hannah looked up, surprised by the offering of such personal pain. In her experience, people guarded their hurts carefully, using them as weapons rather than bridges. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. She was a good woman, deserved better than what life gave her. Eli turned his mug between his hands, the gesture unconscious and well-practiced. Community keeps telling me I should marry again. Says it's not good for a man to be alone. But you don't want to. Didn't want to, Eli corrected. Hard to imagine loving someone the way I loved Sarah. Hard to think anyone would want a grieving widower set in his ways. Hannah finished her bread in silence, aware that she was being told something important, but unsure why. Outside, the sun climbed higher, and she could hear the distant sounds of a community beginning its day. Horses and buggies on the road, voices. A calling greetings, the rhythm of a world that knew its place and purpose. I should go, she said again, but with less conviction than before. Where? The simple question hung between them. Where indeed? Hannah had been running for months, moving from city to city, staying in shelters when she could, sleeping rough when she couldn't. Her resources had dwindled to nothing, and winter was coming to this Pennsylvania valley with the promise of killing cold. I don't know, she admitted. Eli studied her across the table, taking in the proud set of her shoulders, the intelligence in her green eyes, the way she held herself ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. She was thin, too thin, but there was strength in her that adversity had tempered rather than broken. What skills you have? He asked. The question surprised her. Skills? Work skills. Things you're good at. Hannah thought for a moment. Her life had been a series of temporary jobs, brief connections, opportunities that never quite became foundations. I can clean, I've worked in restaurants. I'm good with my hands when I have the chance to be. Good with your hands. How? She gestured vaguely. Fixing things, making things work. I learned some basic carpentry in... She stopped, catching herself before revealing too much of her past. Eli waited, but when no more information came, he simply nodded. I'm a carpenter. Make furniture, cabinets, small buildings. Been doing it since I was 14. It's good work, Hannah said, meaning it. She had seen his craftsmanship in the furniture around the house, the precise joints and smooth finishes that spoke of skill passed down through generations. It is honest work, but it's lonely work for a man eating supper by himself every night. Something in his tone made Hannah look at him more carefully. There was a weight to his words, a deliberation that suggested this conversation was heading somewhere specific. Hannah, Eli said, and her name sounded different in his voice, careful and considered. I'm going to say something, and I want you to listen before you run. Her muscles tensed, ready for flight, but something in his manner kept her in the chair. I need a wife, he said simply, not for love. I'm not sure I have that to give again, but for companionship, for help with the house and the work, for the community's peace of mind. He paused, meeting her eyes directly. And you need a home, a place to be safe, to have enough to eat, to not have to look over your shoulder. Hannah stared at him, certain she had misheard. Are you asking me to marry you? I'm asking you to consider it, Eli said calmly. A practical arrangement. You'd have a roof over your head, food on the table, protection of the community. I'd have a wife, which would settle the worrying of my neighbors and give me help with the day-to-day living. But you don't even know me. I know enough. I know. You're honest. You could have taken things from the barn and didn't. I know you've got pride. You're not begging, even hungry as you are. I know you've got courage. Whatever you're running from, you're still standing. Hannah's mind reeled. Marriage. To this quiet, gentle man with sad eyes and capable hands. It was insane. It was impossible. It was also, she realized with a shock, the first offer of genuine safety she had received in longer than she could remember. I don't understand, she said. It's simple. I need a wife and you need a home. We could help each other. But what about... She gestured helplessly, unsure how to frame questions about intimacy, affection, the 1,000 small things that made a marriage more than a legal contract. Separate rooms, Eli said, understanding. No expectations beyond what we both agree to, just two people helping each other through life's difficulties. Outside, a horse and buggy passed the house, and Hannah caught a glimpse of a woman in a prayer cap, children beside her, all heading toward whatever constituted their normal day. It was a world of structure and tradition, as foreign to her chaotic existence as another planet. Why would you do this? She asked. Why would you offer this to a stranger? Eli was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving to the wooden box on the mantel. Because sometimes God puts people where they need to be, he said finally, and because loneliness is a hard thing to carry alone. The words settled between them like a bridge neither had expected to find. Hannah looked around the kitchen again, seeing not just shelter, but the possibility of belonging. For the first time in years, someone was offering her not just temporary refuge, but a place in the world. I don't know anything about being Amish, she said. You can learn. We're not complicated people. I don't know anything about being a wife. Neither do I these days. Despite everything, Hannah found herself almost smiling. You've been a husband before. To Sarah, being a husband to you would be different. Everything would be different. The honesty of it, the acknowledgement that this would be uncharted territory for both of them, struck Hannah as the most reasonable thing anyone had said to her in months. No false promises, no pretense that this would be anything other than what it was, a practical arrangement between two people who needed what the other could provide. "I could leave," she said, testing. "If it doesn't work out." "You could," Eli agreed, "though I'd hope you'd give it an honest try first." Hannah stared into her coffee cup, seeing reflected there a future she had never dared to imagine. Stability, safety, a chance to stop running, stop looking over her shoulder, stop wondering where her next meal would come from, or where she would sleep when the weather turned cold. "What would people say?" she asked. "Your community. Some will understand, others will talk, but they'll accept it in time, especially if they see you're trying to fit in. And if I can't? Fit in, I mean." Eli shrugged, a gesture that somehow conveyed both resignation and hope. "Then we'll have tried. That's more than either of us has right now." The truth of it hit Hannah like a physical blow. This man, this stranger, was offering her something she had never had in her 24 years, a place to belong, a role to fill, a chance to be part of something larger than her own survival. "I need to think," she said. "Of course." Eli stood, moving to refill her coffee cup. "You can stay in the guest room tonight. Decide in the morning." Just like that. Just like that. Hannah looked at him, really looked, seeing past the beard and the simple clothes to the man beneath. There was kindness there, but also steel. Gentleness, but not weakness. He was offering her salvation without demanding anything she wasn't prepared to give. "Eli Stoltzfus," she said, testing his name on her tongue. "Hannah." He paused. "What's your last name?" "Wright," she said, surprising herself by telling the truth. "Hannah Wright. Hannah Wright," he repeated, and somehow in his voice it sounded like a name that belonged to someone who mattered. As the sun climbed higher over the Pennsylvania hills, two people sat in a simple kitchen and contemplated the strangest bargain either had ever considered. Outside, the world continued its ancient rhythms, unaware that inside one small house, two broken hearts were tentatively reaching toward the possibility of healing. Hannah woke to sunlight streaming through curtains she hadn't seen in months. For a moment, the unfamiliar comfort disoriented her. The softness of an actual mattress, the weight of clean quilts, the absence of the hypervigilance that usually jerked her awake at every sound. Then memory flooded back. The barn, the breakfast, the impossible conversation. Eli's voice drifted up from the kitchen below, speaking Pennsylvania Dutch to someone, a woman's voice responding in kind. Community visitors, Hannah realized, and felt a familiar spike of anxiety. She had learned to avoid groups, to slip away before questions could be asked or suspicions raised. She dressed quickly in her cleanest clothes, which weren't clean enough for meeting neighbors, and crept downstairs. Through the kitchen window, she could see Eli in deep conversation with an older woman whose gray hair was tucked neatly beneath a white prayer cap. Their voices were too low to make out words, but their body language spoke of serious discussion. Hannah was reaching for her suitcase when Eli appeared in the doorway. "Mary Byler," he said without preamble. "My nearest neighbor. She's the one who brings the bread." "I should go," Hannah said automatically. "Should you?" The question stopped her. Should she? She had a warm place to sleep, food in her stomach for the first time in days, and a bizarre but genuine offer of security. But she also had a lifetime of experience that taught her when situations became complicated, it was better to leave before the complications multiplied. "She's curious about you," Eli continued. "Told her I was thinking of remarrying." Hannah's eyes widened. "You told her about us? About your idea?" "Told her I'd found someone who might be willing. Said we were considering it, but I haven't decided yet." "I know." Eli's voice remained calm, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of vulnerability, that made Hannah realize how much courage this admission had cost him. But Mary's a practical woman. She understands arrangements made for practical reasons. Through the window, Hannah could see the older woman watching the house with the patient attention of someone accustomed to reading situations. There was No judgment in her posture, only curiosity and what might have been hope. What did you tell her about me? The truth. That you needed help, and I needed a wife. That we might be able to help each other. And she didn't think you'd lost your mind. Eli almost smiled. Mary buried 3 husbands. She knows something about the mathematics of survival. The frank assessment should have been shocking, but instead, Hannah found it oddly comforting. These people understood necessity. They didn't require romance or passion to validate a union. They understood that sometimes 2 people could build something worthwhile from mutual need and respect. Hannah, Eli said quietly, I need to know your answer. She looked at him standing. In his own kitchen, this man who had offered her salvation without asking for her story or demanding guarantees about her character. He had fed her, sheltered her, and proposed marriage to a stranger because they both needed what the other could provide. Yes, she heard herself say. The word hung between them, small but monumental. Eli's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he had been holding his breath. Yes, I need a wife and you need a home. She parroted his words back to him, testing how they sounded in her voice. If you meant what you said, separate rooms, no expectations, then yes. Eli extended his hand, the gesture formal and somehow ceremonial. Partners, then. Hannah took his hand, feeling the calloused strength of 30 years' honest work. Partners. The handshake lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but in those moments, Hannah felt something shift inside her. For the first time since childhood, someone was promising her safety without asking for payment she couldn't afford to give. When? She asked, suddenly practical. Soon as we can arrange it. Bishop Samuel will want to meet with us, make sure we understand what we're undertaking. There'll be paperwork, but soon. How soon? Week, maybe 2. Hannah nodded, then realized she was still holding his hand. She released it, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. Should we tell Mary? We should. Mary Byler proved to be a woman of few words and keen observation. She studied Hannah with the thorough assessment of someone accustomed to judging character. Quickly and accurately, Hannah endured the scrutiny, recognizing the protective instinct behind it. This woman cared about Eli and wanted to be sure he wasn't making a mistake that would bring him more pain. You've been traveling alone, Mary said. It wasn't a question. Yes, ma'am. Running from something or to something? Hannah glanced at Eli, who nodded encouragement. From something dangerous. Not anymore. Mary considered this. You know anything about keeping house? Some. I can learn more? You know anything about being married? The blunt question made Hannah's breath catch. No, ma'am, nothing useful. Honesty's useful, Mary said dryly. More useful than most things young people bring to marriage these days. She turned to Eli. You sure about this, Eli Stoltzfus? As sure as I can be about anything. Sarah wouldn't mind. The question was asked gently, but Hannah saw Eli's jaw tighten slightly. Sarah wanted me to be happy. She wouldn't want me to spend my life grieving. Mary nodded slowly. No, she wouldn't. She looked between them again, taking in Hannah's defensive posture and Eli's careful distance. This is a practical arrangement, then, not a love match. Yes, they said simultaneously. Good. Love matches are pretty, but practical arrangements last. Mary gathered her shawl around her shoulders. I'll tell Bishop Samuel you want to see him. And Eli, you'll need to tell the rest of the family before word spreads. After Mary left, the house felt smaller, as if the weight of their decision had compressed the very air. Hannah sat at the kitchen table, staring at her hands and trying to process what she had just committed to. Having second thoughts? Eli asked. Third and fourth thoughts, Hannah admitted. But not changing my mind. Good. Because Bishop Samuel will want to see us tomorrow. What will he ask? Eli sat across from her, his expression thoughtful. Why we want to marry, whether we understand the commitment we're making, whether we're prepared to honor our vows even when it's difficult. And what will we tell him? The truth. that we need each other, that we're willing to build something together, and that we understand marriage is about more than feelings. Hannah absorbed this. Will he try to talk us out of it? He might. Samuel's seen a lot of marriages, good ones and bad ones. He'll want to be sure we're not making a mistake that will hurt us both, are we? Making a mistake? Eli was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving around the kitchen that had been too empty for too long. I don't know, he said finally, but I know doing nothing is its own kind of mistake. I know being alone is wearing me down, and I know you need safety more than you need romance. What if we can't make it work? What if we're too different? Then we'll have tried, and you'll know you have a place here regardless. The promise that she would have a place regardless of whether their arrangement succeeded nearly undid Hannah's composure. In her experience, belonging was always conditional, always dependent on pleasing the right people or avoiding the wrong ones. Eli, she said, then stopped, unsure how to voice the gratitude that was too large for words. I know, he said quietly. I know. That evening they sat on the front porch and watched the sun set over the Pennsylvania hills. Neither spoke much, both lost in thoughts of the magnitude of what they were undertaking. Tomorrow would bring Bishop Samuel and his questions, and after that the wheels would be set in motion for a marriage unlike any either had imagined. But tonight they were simply two people who had found each other in the space between desperation and hope, preparing to take the biggest leap of faith either had ever attempted. Hannah, Eli said as the last light faded from the sky. Yes, thank you. She looked at him, this man who was thanking her for agreeing to marry him out of mutual necessity. For what? For saying yes, for being brave enough to try this. Hannah thought of all the reasons she should be thanking him instead, for the food, the shelter, the offer of a future when she had none. But she understood what he meant. It took courage to reach across the space between two broken lives and suggest they might heal together. Thank you for asking, she said. And in the gathering darkness of a Pennsylvania evening, two strangers who had agreed to become partners sat side by side and contemplated the mystery of what they were about to build. The wedding ceremony took place on a Tuesday morning in Bishop Samuel's front room, witnessed by Mary Byler, two deacons, and the bishop's wife. Hannah had never imagined her wedding day would be quite like this. Standing beside a man she had known for less than 2 weeks, wearing a borrowed blue dress that Mary had altered to fit her thin frame, speaking vows that were as much business arrangement as sacred covenant. Bishop Samuel, a man whose weathered face spoke of decades shepherding his community through joys and sorrows, had questioned them extensively the day before. His probing had been gentle, but thorough. Did they understand that marriage was a lifelong commitment? Were they prepared to honor each other even when affection might be absent? Could they build a household based on respect and mutual care rather than passion? Hannah had answered honestly. She was prepared to be a faithful partner, to contribute to their shared life, and to honor the commitment they were making. Eli had been equally direct. He needed companionship and help, she needed security and belonging, and they were both willing to work toward making their arrangement succeed. I've seen love matches fail and practical marriages thrive, Samuel had said finally. What matters is that you both understand what you're undertaking and why. Now, standing in the simple ceremony, Hannah felt the weight of those words. When Eli took her hand to place a simple gold band on her finger, his touch was gentle but unfamiliar. When she repeated the vows to honor, cherish, and remain faithful, the words felt both foreign and surprisingly meaningful. You may kiss. Your bride, Bishop Samuel said. The moment hung between them, awkward and unprecedented. They had shaken hands to seal their agreement, but they had never kissed, never embraced, never touched beyond the most necessary contact. Eli leaned forward carefully, and Hannah met him halfway. The kiss was brief, chaste, and somehow reassuring, a promise of respect rather than passion. Mr. and Mrs. Stoltzfus, the bishop pronounced, and Hannah felt a shock of recognition. She had a name now that connected her to someone else, a place in the world that was legally and spiritually recognized. The wedding dinner was held at Mary's house, a simple meal shared with the same small group who had witnessed the ceremony. Hannah found herself studying the faces around the table. Kind faces, mostly, though she caught some curious glances and a few expressions of polite reservation. These people were willing to accept her because Eli vouched for her, but acceptance and trust were different things. "You'll find your place among us," Mary said quietly as they cleared dishes together. "Give it time." "How much time?" Hannah asked. "However much it takes. We're not quick to trust, but we're not quick to judge either. Show us who you are, and we'll make room for you." That first night in Eli's house, their house now, stretched ahead like uncharted territory. They had discussed the practical arrangements. Hannah would take the small bedroom at the back of the house. Eli would keep the main bedroom. They would share meals, household duties, and the daily rhythms of life. But their private spaces would remain private. Hannah sat on the edge of her narrow bed, looking around the room that was now hers. It contained a bed, a simple dresser, a chair, and a small window that looked out over the garden. Her few possessions, the contents of her battered suitcase, looked lost in the sparse space. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Hannah, I brought you something." She opened the door to find Eli holding a folded quilt, not the worn one from the barn, but a beautiful piece in blues and whites, stitched with the intricate patterns she was beginning to recognize as distinctly Amish. "Sarah made it," he said simply. "Wedding ring pattern. She always said it would be for our guest room someday." Hannah took the quilt carefully, feeling the weight of both the gift and its significance. "Are you sure?" She'd want it used. She'd want you to be comfortable here. The kindness of it. Offering her something precious from his marriage to make her feel welcome in their arrangement nearly brought tears to Hannah's eyes. "Thank you." Eli nodded and withdrew, leaving Hannah to spread the quilt over her bed. The colors transformed the austere room, and as she ran her hands over the careful stitches, she felt connected to the woman who had made it. Sarah, who had loved Eli and been loved in return, who had created beauty with her hands and left it behind for a stranger to find comfort in. The next morning brought the beginning of their new routine. Hannah woke early, uncertain what was expected of her, and found Eli already in the kitchen. Coffee brewing and breakfast started. "I usually eat light in the morning," he said without looking up. "Bread, maybe some eggs if the hens are cooperating." "I can cook," Hannah offered. "So can I. We'll figure out what works." They ate in companionable silence, both adjusting to the strangeness of sharing breakfast with another person. Outside, the October air carried the scent of changing leaves and the distant sound of horses and buggies beginning the day's work. "What do you need me to do?" Hannah asked. Eli considered this. "House needs tending. Garden needs to be put to bed for winter. Mary's been helping with washing and such, but she has her own household to manage." Hannah nodded. These were tasks she could handle, ways to contribute that didn't require expertise she didn't possess. "What about your work, the carpentry?" "Keeps me busy. I have orders through Christmas, tables, cabinets, some repair work." He paused. "You said you were good with your hands, interested in learning." The offer surprised her. "You teach me if you want to learn. Always useful to have someone who can help with the finishing work." After breakfast, Eli showed her around the property properly, the vegetable garden that needed harvesting and preparation for winter, the chicken coop that required daily tending, the root cellar where preserves and winter stores were kept. Everything spoke of self-sufficiency and careful planning, a life lived in harmony with seasons and cycles that Hannah had never experienced. The barn workshop was where Eli's true artistry showed. Hand tools hung in precise order on wall-mounted boards, their arrangement speaking of decades of practice. Half-finished pieces of furniture lined the workspace. A rocking chair missing its arms, a cabinet waiting for its doors, a dining table being hand-rubbed to a lustrous finish. "Beautiful work," Hannah said, running her fingers along the smooth curve of the table's edge. "Takes time." can't rush wood. It tells you what it wants to become. Hannah picked up one of his tools, a hand plane worn smooth by years of use. Your father's? Some of them. His father's before that. Craftsman's tools last longer than the craftsman, if they're cared for properly. There was philosophy in that observation, Hannah realized. The idea that work could outlast the worker, that skill passed down through generations could create something approaching immortality. "Would you really teach me?" she asked. Eli looked at her, seeing something in her face that made him nod slowly. "Starting tomorrow if you want. But it's not easy work. Takes patience and practice." "I have both," Hannah said, surprising herself with the confidence in her voice. "Then we'll see what you're made of." That afternoon, Hannah began learning the rhythm of her new life. She gathered eggs from hens, who regarded her with suspicious eyes, tended to laundry using methods that predated electric washing machines, and began preparing the garden for winter under Mary's patient guidance. "You're settling in well," Mary observed as they worked together to harvest the last of the tomatoes. "It's different," Hannah admitted. "Quiet, peaceful. Too quiet?" Hannah considered this. After months of hypervigilance, of sleeping with one ear always listening for danger, the profound peace of the Amish community felt almost alien. But it was a healing quiet, she realized. A quiet that invited rest rather than demanded vigilance. "No," she said finally, "not too quiet." That evening, she and Eli sat on the front porch again, watching the sun set over their shared valley. The silence between them was becoming more comfortable, less fraught with uncertainty about what they were supposed to say or do. "Hannah," Eli said as twilight deepened. "Yes, you did well today. Fitting in, I mean." The simple praise warmed her, more than it probably should have. "Thank you. It'll get easier. The uncertainty, I mean, once we find our rhythm." Hannah hoped he was right. She had never been part of anything long enough to find a rhythm, never stayed in one place long enough to feel the comfort of routine. But here, in this quiet valley with this gentle man, she was beginning to believe that rhythm might be possible. "Eli," she said as they prepared to go inside. "Yes? Thank you for all of this." He paused at the door, his hand on the frame. "You don't need to keep thanking me, Hannah. We're helping each other, remember." But as they went to their separate rooms, Hannah thought that perhaps some kinds of help deserved gratitude, regardless of whether they were mutual. And perhaps learning to receive kindness without suspicion was part of finding her place in this new life. 3 weeks into their marriage, Hannah stood in Eli's workshop, holding a piece of sandpaper and marveling at the transformation taking place beneath her hands. What had started as rough-cut pine was becoming smooth as silk under her careful attention, each stroke of the sandpaper revealing more of the wood's natural beauty. "Feel the grain," Eli instructed, his voice carrying the patience of a natural teacher. "Work with it, not against it. The wood will tell you which direction it wants to go." Hannah adjusted her technique, following the subtle lines that ran through the board. It was meditative work, requiring attention but not conversation, and she found herself relaxing into the rhythm of it. Beside her, Eli worked on the more complex joinery for the cabinet they were building together, her first real project. "Like this?" she asked, pausing to show him her progress. Eli examined her work, running his fingers over the surface she had smoothed. His hands were careful, gentle, and Hannah found herself watching the way he touched the wood with something approaching reverence. "Perfect," he said, and Hannah felt a flush of pride that surprised her with its intensity. They had fallen into this routine over the past weeks, mornings for household tasks, afternoons in the workshop when weather permitted. Hannah was proving to have an instinct for the work that pleased them both. Her hands, long accustomed to temporary tasks and quick fixes, seemed to understand the patience woodworking required. "Tell me about the tools," Hannah said, as they moved to the next phase of their project. "How did you learn all this?" Eli selected a hand plane from the wall, checking its blade with practiced efficiency. "Started when I was 14. My father said every Amish man should know how to work wood, for repairs, for furniture, for building what his family needs. Was he a carpenter too? Farmer mostly, but he could make anything the farm required. Taught me that tools are only as good as the hands that hold them. Eli demonstrated the proper grip, the angle of approach, the smooth stroke that would shave paper-thin curls from the wood surface. Hannah watched intently, memorizing not just the technique, but the philosophy behind it. In the week she had been here, she was beginning to understand that the Amish approach to life was built on such principles, that skill was earned through practice, that quality mattered more than speed, that work done well was its own form of worship. Your turn, Eli said, offering her the plane. Hannah took the tool carefully, feeling its weight and balance. The first few strokes were awkward, but gradually she found the rhythm. Wood shavings began to curl away from the blade, leaving behind a surface smoother than what her sandpaper had achieved. That's it, Eli encouraged. Trust your hands. As Hannah worked, she became aware of Eli watching her. Not critically, but with the focused attention of someone genuinely interested in her success. It was a kind of attention she wasn't accustomed to receiving, certainly not from men, and she found it both comforting and slightly unsettling. Eli, she said during a break, when they were sharing coffee and the simple cookies Mary had brought the day before. Can I ask you something personal? We're married, he said with a slight smile. Everything's personal now. The reminder of their relationship, legal, spiritual, but still so undefined, made Hannah hesitate. But curiosity won out over caution. What was Sarah like? Eli's expression grew thoughtful, but not pained as she had feared it might. Sarah was... He paused, searching for words. She was sunshine, I suppose. Always found reasons to be happy, even when happiness was hard to come by. How did you meet? Church picnic when we were 17. She was laughing at something her friend had said, and the sound of it just stopped everything for me. I knew I wanted to hear that laugh every day for the rest of my life. The simple declaration carried such weight that Hannah felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. To be loved like that, to inspire such devotion in another person, it was something she had never experienced and wasn't sure she ever would. Tell me about her, she said softly. Eli leaned back in his chair, his gaze moving around the workshop that had been shaped by years of shared life with Sarah. She couldn't cook worth anything when we married. Burned water, my mother used to joke. But she was determined to learn, and by the end, she could make bread that would make angels weep. She helped you with the carpentry? Some. She was better. With the bookkeeping, keeping track of orders and payments, had a head for numbers that I never developed. He gestured toward a corner of the workshop where a small desk sat covered with papers. Still use her system. Hannah absorbed this information, building a picture of a woman who had been partner as well as wife, someone who had found ways to contribute to their shared enterprise, even when her talents lay in different areas. Do you miss her terribly? She asked, then immediately regretted the question's boldness, but Eli considered it seriously, without taking offense. Every day, he said finally, but it's a different kind of missing now. Less sharp, more like an ache you've learned to live with. Hannah nodded, understanding better than he might expect. She had her own catalogue of losses, her own collection of aches that had become part of her daily existence. Is that why you wanted this arrangement, she asked? Because you can't imagine loving someone else that way? Partly. Eli turned his coffee mug between his hands. The gesture she was learning was a habit when he was thinking deeply. But also because I've learned something about love that young people don't usually understand. What's that? That love isn't just a feeling, it's also a choice, made over and over again, especially when the feeling isn't there. Sarah and I, we had the feeling first, then learned to make the choice. Maybe you and I can learn to make the choice first, and see what grows from that. The idea was revolutionary to Hannah, who had experienced love primarily as something that happened to her, usually painfully, rather than something she could actively participate in creating. "Do you think that's possible?" she asked. "Building love deliberately? I think respect can grow into affection, and affection can deepen into something lasting," Eli said. "I think two people who are committed to each other's well-being can create something worth having, even if it doesn't look like the poems and songs." Hannah considered this as they returned to their work. Around them, the workshop held the accumulated evidence of Eli's decades of craftsmanship, pieces in various stages of completion, tools worn smooth by use, the sweet scent of wood shavings and linseed oil. It was a place where things were built slowly, carefully, with attention to detail and commitment to quality. Perhaps that was how marriages could be built too, she thought. Not with the sudden passion of romance, but with the steady dedication of craftsmen who understood that the best things required time and patience to create. "Hannah," Eli said as they prepared to close the workshop for the day. "Yes, you're a natural at this work. Sarah would have liked that. Seeing her recipe box used, seeing someone learning to create beautiful things with their hands." The comparison to Sarah should have intimidated Hannah, but instead it felt like a blessing. This woman who had loved Eli so completely was somehow making room for Hannah to find her own place in his life. "I hope I can be worthy of her memory," Hannah said. "You don't need to be worthy of her memory," Eli replied gently. "You just need to be worthy of your own." That evening, as Hannah prepared for bed in her small room, she looked around at the space that was slowly becoming hers. Sarah's quilt still covered her bed, but now it was joined by small personal touches. A lamp Eli had moved from another room to give her better reading light, a small shelf he had built to hold her few books, curtains Mary had helped her sew. For the window, it was still sparse by most standards, but it was hers in a way no space had ever been before. And tomorrow, she would return to the workshop to continue learning the craft that might, in time, become more than just a useful skill. Perhaps Eli was right about building love deliberately. Perhaps, like learning to work wood, it was a matter of patience, practice, and trusting that the raw materials could be shaped into something beautiful with enough care and attention. Outside her window, the Pennsylvania night was quiet except for the distant sound of an owl calling across the valley. Hannah fell asleep to that sound, feeling more settled than she had in years, and dreaming of wood shavings that curled like promises in her hands. November brought the first real test of Hannah's integration into Amish life when Mary invited her to join the weekly quilting circle. 6 women gathered each Thursday at Mary's house, their hands busy with needlework, while their conversation ranged from practical matters to gentle gossip about community happenings. Hannah sat beside Ruth Miller, a woman near her own age who had married into the community from Ohio. Ruth's presence was reassuring. She understood what it felt like to be the outsider, learning the unspoken rules of a close-knit society. "The stitches don't have to be perfect," Ruth murmured, as Hannah struggled with the intricate pattern they were working on. "They just have to be yours." Around the quilting frame, the other women discussed plans for the upcoming harvest festival, shared news of births and illnesses, and offered subtle guidance on everything from preserving vegetables to managing difficult relatives. Hannah listened more than she spoke, absorbing the rhythms of conversation that felt so different from any social interaction she had known. "Hannah," said Elizabeth Yoder, the eldest of the group, "Mary tells us you're learning carpentry from Eli." The comment drew attention from the others, and Hannah felt the familiar flutter of anxiety that came with being the focus of scrutiny. "He's been very patient with me." "Unusual for a woman to learn such skills," Elizabeth observed, her tone carefully neutral. "I enjoy working with my hands," Hannah replied, keeping her voice steady. "Eli says I have an aptitude for it." "Useful skill," Ruth interjected supportively. "My husband appreciates having someone who can help with repairs around the house." Hannah shot her a grateful look, understanding that Ruth was deliberately steering the conversation away from judgment and toward practical acceptance. Indeed, Mary added, Hannah made a lovely spice cabinet for her kitchen, dovetail joints clean as any I've seen. The praise coming from Mary carried weight with the group. Hannah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders as the conversation moved on to other topics. But it was Sarah's recipe book that truly opened doors for her. Hannah had been experimenting with the handwritten recipes, trying to master the dishes that had been Eli's favorites during his first marriage. The book revealed Sarah as a woman who had approached cooking with the same methodical care that Eli brought to woodworking. Each recipe annotated with notes about timing, ingredient substitutions, and improvements discovered through practice. Eli's been quieter lately, Mary mentioned during one of their afternoon visits. More thoughtful, if that's possible. Is that bad? Hannah asked, pausing in her kneading of bread dough. Not bad. Different. He's been alone with his grief for 3 years. Having someone in the house again, it's stirring things up for him. Hannah considered this as she shaped the dough into loaves. She had noticed changes in Eli, too, moments when he seemed surprised by laughter, times when he caught himself before, mentioning Sarah in every other sentence, instances when he looked at Hannah as if he was seeing her for the first time. Am I making things harder for him? You're making things different for him. Whether that's harder or easier remains to be seen. That evening, Hannah prepared one of Sarah's more complex recipes, a chicken and dumpling dish that required careful timing and attention to detail. When Eli came in from the workshop, the kitchen was filled with the scent of herbs and comfort food that clearly triggered powerful memories. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Sarah's recipe. Yes. I hope you don't mind. Eli moved to the sink to wash his hands, taking longer than necessary. She only made that for special occasions. Birthdays, when the harvest was particularly good, when we had something to celebrate. Hannah's heart sank. I'm sorry. I didn't realize. No. Eli turned to face her, his eyes bright with emotion that wasn't entirely sadness. It's good. It's time that recipe was used again. They ate in relative silence, but it was a comfortable quiet rather than an awkward one. Hannah watched Eli savor each bite, seeing in his face the interplay of memory and present moment, loss and gratitude. It's exactly right, he said finally. She would be pleased that you took such care with it. Later, as they cleaned dishes together, a routine that had developed naturally over the weeks, Eli spoke more freely than he had since Hannah's arrival. I've been thinking about something you asked, he said, drying a pot with careful attention, about whether it's possible to build love deliberately. Hannah stilled, her hands motionless in the soapy water. And I think maybe we already are. The steam words hung between them, simple but loaded with implication. Hannah felt her breath catch, uncertain how to respond. I don't know what kind of love it is, Eli continued. It's not what I had with Sarah, but it's something. The way you listen when I talk about the work, the care you take with her recipes, the way you've made space for her memory instead of trying to erase it. Hannah turned to face him, dish towel in her hands. I could never try to erase Sarah. She made you who you are. And who I am now includes caring about what happens to you, Eli said quietly. About whether you're happy here, whether you feel safe, whether you're finding what you need. I am, Hannah said, the words coming out more intense than she had intended. I'm finding things I didn't even know I needed. They stood there in the kitchen that had become theirs, surrounded by the domestic evidence of their shared life, the dishes they had eaten from, the bread Hannah had baked, the quiet rhythms they had built together. Hannah, Eli said. And there was something different in his voice, something that made her pulse quicken. Would it be all right if I kissed you? Not for ceremony or witnesses, but because I want to? The question was asked with such careful respect for her autonomy that Hannah felt something inside her chest loosen and expand. No one had ever asked her permission like that, with such genuine concern for her comfort. Yes, she whispered. This kiss was nothing like their brief wedding kiss. This was slow, tentative, a question asked and answered by lips that were learning to trust each other. When they parted, Hannah felt shaken by the tenderness of it, by the way Eli's hands had framed her face as if she were something precious. "Was that—" she began, then stopped, unsure what she was asking. "That was the beginning of something new," Eli said softly. "Something that belongs to us, not to my past or your past, but to what we're building together." Hannah nodded, understanding that they had just crossed some invisible threshold in their relationship. They were still partners in a practical arrangement, still two broken people helping each other heal, but they were also becoming something more. That night, lying in her bed under Sarah's quilt, Hannah touched her lips and marveled at how different this kind of awakening felt from anything she had experienced before. There was no desperation in it, no fear of abandonment or betrayal, no sense that she had to earn affection through compliance or sacrifice. Instead, there was the steady warmth of growing trust, the comfort of knowing she was valued for who she was rather than what she could provide, and the hope that whatever they were building together would be strong enough to weather the challenges that lay ahead. Outside her window, the November wind stirred the bare branches of the oak tree that shaded the house. But inside, Hannah felt the first stirrings of something she had never dared to hope for, a love built on respect and choice, rather than need and fear, growing slowly but surely, like wood gaining strength and beauty under a craftsman's patient hands. December settled over Lancaster County with the kind of cold that seeped into bones and made the warmth of human connection feel like salvation. Hannah woke each morning to frost on her bedroom window and the comforting sound of Eli building up the fire in the kitchen stove. Their routines had deepened into something approaching domesticity, coffee shared in comfortable silence, breakfast prepared together, days spent in complementary work that brought them back together for supper, and evening conversation. The change in their relationship since that first kiss had been subtle but unmistakable. They still maintained separate bedrooms, still approached physical affection with careful respect for boundaries, but there was a new awareness between them, a recognition that they were building something that had value beyond mere convenience. It was during one of their evening Bible readings, a practice that had begun awkwardly but had grown into a cherished ritual, that Hannah first felt the stirring of spiritual awakening she hadn't expected. "Read that part again," she said, interrupting Eli's steady cadence through the book of Ruth. Eli looked up from his father's worn Bible, its pages soft with decades of handling. "Which part?" "Where Ruth speaks to Naomi, about going where she goes, living where she lives." Eli found the passage and read aloud, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee, for whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God my God." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, absorbing words that seemed to speak directly to her circumstances. Here was a story of a woman who had chosen to bind her fate to another's, who had left behind everything familiar to build a new life among strangers. "Do you think Ruth was afraid?" Hannah asked. Eli considered the question with the seriousness he brought to all matters of faith. "I imagine she was. Leaving everything you've known, trusting your future to people who owe you nothing, that takes courage. But she did it anyway. She did it anyway, and found blessing in the choosing." Hannah thought about this as winter deepened around them. She had found her own blessing in choosing to stay, in choosing to trust Eli's offer of partnership, in choosing to open herself to the possibility that she could belong somewhere. The community's acceptance of her had grown warmer as the weeks passed. She had proven herself reliable in the small tasks that built trust, helping with sick children, contributing to church meals, offering her growing woodworking skills when neighbors needed repairs. The novelty of Eli's unusual marriage was giving way to appreciation for Hannah's practical contributions. It was Bishop Samuel who provided the most direct affirmation of her place among them. "Hannah Stoltzfus," he said after church one Sunday, using her married name with deliberate emphasis. "Mary tells me you've been helping with the widow Carson's porch railings." "The wood was rotted through," Hannah replied. "Dangerous for someone her age." "Indeed. And I hear the craftsmanship was exceptional." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Eli taught me well." "Eli provided the instruction. You provided the heart for service." Bishop Samuel's weathered face creased into something approaching a smile. "That's what makes a true member of community. Not where you were born, but what you choose to do with the gifts you've been given." The conversation stayed with Hannah through the following week, as she and Eli worked together on their most ambitious project yet, a dining table commissioned by a young couple preparing for their own wedding. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was helping create furniture for a love match while building her own unconventional marriage. "Tell me about your family," Eli said one afternoon as they applied the first coat of finish to the table's surface. "Your real family, I mean. Before whatever you were running from." Hannah's hands stilled on her polishing cloth. She had shared fragments of her past with Eli over the months, but never the whole story. The question hung between them, and she felt the familiar urge to deflect, to change the subject, to protect herself from vulnerability. But this was Eli, who had offered her safety without asking for her secrets, who had shown her nothing but patience and growing tenderness. If she couldn't trust him with her truth, what was the point of the life they were building together? "I grew up in foster care," she said quietly, continuing to work on the table as she spoke. "Mother died when I was 8. Never knew my father. Got bounced between families who saw foster children as either cheap labor or monthly payments from the state." Eli didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes or false sympathy. He simply continued his own work and listened. "Some homes were better than others," Hannah continued. "The Johnsons were kind, kept me for 3 years, taught me basic cooking and sewing. But when Mr. Johnson lost his job, they couldn't afford to keep foster children anymore. You were alone again. Always alone, eventually. I learned not to get attached, not to hope for permanence. Just survive until 18, then figure out how to make it in the world." "What happened when you turned 18? Hannah was quiet for several strokes of her cloth before answering. "I thought I'd figured it out. Got involved with someone who promised me everything I'd never had. Stability, love, a place to belong. Marcus." The name fell between them like a stone dropped in still water. Eli's hands paused in their work, but he didn't look up, didn't pressure her to continue. "He was charming, successful, made me believe I was special, that he'd been waiting his whole life for someone like me." Hannah's laugh was bitter with old pain. "I was so hungry for love, for someone to choose me, that I ignored all the warning signs." "What kind of warning signs?" "Control, mostly. Little things at first, who I could spend time with, what I could wear, how I should act when we were with his friends. Then bigger things, where I could work, how I could spend money, what I was allowed to say and think." Eli's jaw tightened, but his voice remained gentle. "He hurt you. In every way someone can hurt another person," Hannah said simply. "And when I finally found the courage to leave, he made sure I understood that running would mean losing everything. My job, my apartment, my few friends. He had connections, influence. He could make my life impossible if I tried to start over. Anywhere he could find me. So you kept running. For 18 months, different cities, different names, always looking over my shoulder. Until I was so tired of being afraid that I just stopped, figured I'd rather face whatever he might do than keep living like a ghost. And that's when you came here." Hannah nodded. "Ran out of money in Philadelphia. Heard Lancaster County was a good place to disappear for a while. Lots of small communities, people who minded their own business. I was just trying to find somewhere to sleep when I found your barn." They worked in silence for several minutes. The only sounds, the whisper of cloth on wood and the distant call of crows outside the workshop. Hannah felt raw from the telling, but also lighter, as if naming her fears had reduced their power over her. "Hannah," Eli said finally, "this Marcus, could he still find you here?" The question she had been dreading, the fear that still woke her sometimes in the deep hours of the night. I don't know. Maybe. Probably not if I stay careful. You don't have to stay careful anymore, Eli said quietly. You have a name now. That's legally yours. A community that knows you, a husband who would protect you. The simple statement of protection, offered without drama or demands for gratitude, nearly undid Hannah's composure. You would do that, even knowing everything? Eli finally looked up from his work, meeting her eyes directly. Hannah, whatever that man did to you, whatever he took from you, it doesn't change who you are or what you're worth. It doesn't change what we're building here. But if he found me, it could bring trouble to your community. Let me worry about that. Eli's voice carried a quiet steel that reminded Hannah that peaceful didn't mean weak. You're not running anymore. You're home. You're the word, home, settled into Hannah's chest with the weight of absolute truth. This place, this man, this life they were creating together, it was home in a way she had never experienced before. I love you, she said, the words escaping before she could think better of them. Eli's hands stilled completely in the silence that followed. Hannah held her breath, wondering if she had spoken too soon, revealed too much, frightened him with the intensity of what she felt. Then he smiled, really smiled, in a way she had never seen before, and said, I love you too. Different from how I love Sarah, but real, deep, growing stronger every day. They came together across the half-finished table, meeting in a kiss that tasted of linseed oil and possibility, of shared work and growing trust, of two people who had found in each other not just partnership, but genuine love. Outside, snow began to fall on the Pennsylvania hills, covering the world in white silence. But inside the workshop, two hearts that had been broken in different ways were learning that love built deliberately, with patience and respect and daily choice, could be as strong as any love that blazed up in passion, perhaps stronger because it was built to last. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, delivered by a lawyer's courier who seemed wildly out of place in the quiet simplicity of the Amish settlement. Hannah watched from the kitchen window as the man in his expensive suit approached. The front door, her heart immediately jumping to the worst possible conclusions. Marcus had found her. Someone was challenging their marriage. The government had questions about her identity. All the fears she thought she had put behind her came rushing back as Eli answered the door with his usual calm courtesy. Mrs. Hannah Wright Stoltzfus? The courier asked, consulting his clipboard. That's my wife, Eli confirmed, his eyes finding Hannah through the window. The envelope the man handed over was thick, official, bearing the letterhead of a law firm in Boston that Hannah had never heard of. She signed for it with hands that trembled slightly, watched the courier drive away in his gleaming sedan, and then stood in her kitchen holding what felt like a live explosive device. What is it? Eli asked gently. Hannah turned the envelope over, noting the return address, Whitmore, Patterson and Associates. I have no idea. They opened it together at the kitchen table, Hannah's heart hammering as Eli carefully slit the heavy paper. Inside was a formal legal document, accompanied by a letter written on matching letterhead. Dear Mrs. Stoltzfus, Eli read aloud, we represent the estate of Eleanor Wright Pemberton, recently deceased. Our records indicate that you are the sole surviving heir to Mrs. Pemberton's considerable estate. Hannah's coffee cup clattered against its saucer. That's impossible. I don't know any Eleanor Pemberton. Eli continued reading. Mrs. Pemberton was formerly Eleanor Wright, your paternal grandmother. She had been searching for you for several years following your mother's death and your subsequent placement in foster care. My grandmother? Hannah whispered. But I don't. My mother said I had no family. That's why I went into the system. According to our investigation, there was estrangement between Mrs. Pemberton and your father that lasted until both their deaths. Mrs. Pemberton deeply regretted losing contact with you and spent considerable resources attempting to locate you after learning of your existence. The words swam before Hannah's eyes as the full implications began to sink in. A grandmother, family she had never known existed, someone who had been looking for her, who had cared about her existence in the world. What kind of estate? Hannah asked faintly. Eli found the relevant paragraph. Mrs. Pemberton's estate includes properties in Boston and Martha's Vineyard, a significant investment portfolio, and various personal effects. The estimated value exceeds $3 million. The kitchen went completely silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant sound of snow falling against the windows. $3 million. More money than Hannah had ever imagined possessing, more than enough to change her life completely. There must be some mistake, she said, but there wasn't. The documents were thorough, complete with copies of birth certificates, death records, and a family tree that traced her lineage back through generations of Wrights and Pembertons, people with old Boston names and older money, a heritage she had never suspected. The letter continued with practical matters. She would need to come to Boston to verify her identity, meet with the lawyers, and begin the process of settling the estate. There were properties to be evaluated, investments to be reviewed, personal effects to be sorted through. She left me everything, Hannah said, staring at the papers as if they might disappear. This woman I never met, who I didn't even know, existed, left me everything. Eli was quiet, studying the documents with the careful attention he brought to complex woodworking plans. Says here she had been estranged from your father since before you were born. Looks like she tried to reconnect after his death, but couldn't locate you through the foster system. Because I aged out and was trying to stay invisible, Hannah realized. All those years, while I was bouncing between homes, thinking I was completely alone, she was looking for me. The irony was almost too much to bear. While she had been desperate for family, for someone to claim her, Eleanor Wright Pemberton had been hiring private investigators and combing public records, trying to find the granddaughter she had lost. To pride and old wounds. Hannah, Eli said carefully, this changes things. The understatement hit her like a physical blow. This changed everything. She was no longer a homeless runaway who had needed to marry for survival. She was now a wealthy woman with options, with resources, with the freedom to choose any life she wanted. Does it? She asked, though she already knew the answer. They spent the rest of that day in a strange sort of suspended animation, going through the motions of their normal routine, while the presence of those legal documents hung over everything like a storm cloud. Hannah tried to focus on the simple furniture repair she was working on, but her hands felt disconnected from her brain. Eli attempted to maintain their usual evening conversation, but both of them were thinking about what wasn't being said. It was after supper, as they sat in the living room with the Bible that had become central to their shared spiritual practice, that the real conversation finally began. "You have to go to Boston," Eli said quietly. Hannah looked up from the pages she had been staring at without reading. "Do I? You can't just ignore this, Hannah. It's not just money. It's your heritage, your family history. It's answers to questions. You've had your whole life. What if I don't want answers? What if I'm happy with the life I have here?" But even as she said it, Hannah knew the decision wasn't that simple. The documents had awakened questions she had spent years trying to suppress. Who was she really? Where did she come from? What kind of woman had Eleanor Pemberton been, and why had she spent her final years searching for a granddaughter she had never met? "This is your chance," Eli continued gently, "to understand where you belong in the world. I belong here, with you. We built this together." Eli's expression was patient but firm. "We built something beautiful, yes, but we built it when you had no other choices. Now you do." The words cut deeper than he probably intended. Hannah felt something cold settle in her stomach as she recognized the truth he was speaking. Their entire relationship was founded on mutual need. She had needed safety and belonging. He had needed companionship and help. But with $3 million and a heritage she had never imagined, the equation was completely different. So, you think I should take the money and leave? I think you should go to Boston, learn about your grandmother, understand what she's offering you, then make a decision about what you want your life to look like. Hannah heard what he wasn't saying, that he expected her to choose the money, the independence, the opportunity to build a life that wasn't based on necessity, that he was already preparing himself for her departure. What if, she began, then stopped, afraid to voice the question that was tearing at her heart. What if what? What if I went to Boston, settled the estate, and then came back? What if I chose to stay here with you, even though I have other options now? Eli was quiet for so long that Hannah began to fear she had asked too much, revealed, and too much hope, made herself too vulnerable. Then I would know, he said finally, that you chose this life, chose me, not because you had to, but because you wanted to. And that would mean everything. The honesty of it broke something open in Hannah's chest. Here was this man who loved her enough to let her go, who understood that real love required freedom to choose rather than obligation to stay. I'm terrified, she admitted. Of what? Of going back into that world. Of discovering that I don't fit there either. She paused, struggling to voice her deepest fear. Of finding out that when I have all the choices in the world, I'm still not sure who I'm supposed to be. Eli reached across the space between their chairs and took her. And you know who you are, Hannah. You're the woman who learned to work wood with patience and skill. You're the woman who makes Sarah's recipes with love and respect for her memory. You're the woman who found a place in this community through service and kindness. But what if that's only because I had no other choice? Then going to Boston will prove it one way or the other. That night, Hannah lay awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to imagine herself in the world the legal documents described. Boston society, $3 million, properties and investments, and the kind of life that had seemed impossibly distant when she was sleeping behind barns and wondering where her next meal would come from. But when she tried to picture herself in that life, all she could see was emptiness. Comfortable emptiness, perhaps, but emptiness nonetheless. The thought of leaving Eli, leaving the community that had slowly opened its heart to her, leaving the simple rhythms of a life built around faith and work and mutual care. It felt like stepping backward into the isolation she had worked so hard to escape. The next morning brought another conversation, this one with Mary, who had arrived with fresh bread and the kind of direct wisdom that cut through confusion like a well-sharpened blade. "Heard about your inheritance," Mary said without preamble, as she set the bread on Hannah's counter. "News travels fast, always does in small communities. Question is, what are you going to do about it?" Hannah had been dreading this conversation, expecting judgment or pressure, or at least curiosity about her mysterious past. Instead, Mary's tone was matter-of-fact, as if sudden inheritances were a common problem requiring practical solutions. "I have to go to Boston, sort things out, learn about my grandmother, understand what she's left me, and then, I don't know. That's what terrifies me." Mary studied Hannah with the shrewd assessment she had brought to their first meeting. "You think this money changes who you are? Doesn't it? Money changes your options, doesn't change your heart." Mary paused in her examination of Hannah's kitchen, noting the small improvements and personal touches that had accumulated over the months. "You've built a life here. Question is whether you built it because you had to or because you wanted to. How do I know the difference? Go find out. Face what you're afraid of facing. Then come back and decide if this is where you belong or if you were just hiding." The brutal honesty of it stung, but Hannah recognized the truth in Mary's words. She had been running when she arrived here, desperate and out of options. Now she had options, more than she had ever imagined possible. The real test would be what she chose when the choosing was entirely up to her. "Mary," Hannah said as the older woman prepared to leave, "what if I go and discover I can't come back? What if I find out I never really belonged here at all?" Mary paused in wrapping her shawl around her shoulders. Then you'll know that too, and knowing the truth, even when it hurts, is better than living a lie, even when it's comfortable. After Mary left, Hannah found Eli in the workshop, standing motionless before the half-finished dining table they had been working on together. His hands rested on its surface, but his attention was clearly elsewhere. "I've been thinking about what you said," Hannah began, "about going to Boston." Eli turned to face her, his expression carefully neutral. "And? I think you're right. I have to go. I have to understand what she's offering me, what my family history really is, who Eleanor Pemberton was, and why she was looking for me." "When?" The practical question hit harder than she expected. "When did you leave the life you had built to explore the life you might have had?" "Soon. The lawyers want to meet with me as quickly as possible. There are deadlines, legal requirements." Hannah paused, gathering courage for what she needed to say next. "Eli, I need you to know, whatever I discover in Boston, whatever choices I make about the inheritance, it won't change how I feel about you. About us. It might," Eli said gently, "and that would be all right. You can't know how you'll feel about this life until you understand what other lives are possible." The generosity of his love, the way he was willing to risk losing her so that she could truly choose him, made Hannah's heart ache with gratitude and terror in equal measure. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "Then don't," Eli said simply. "Make whatever choices you need to make, learn whatever you need to learn, but don't lose sight of what we've built together. Don't let fear or guilt or other people's expectations make your decisions for you." Hannah crossed the workshop and stepped into his arms, feeling the solid warmth of him against her, breathing in the scent of wood shavings and honest work that had become home to her. "I love you," she said against his chest. "I love you too, enough to let you go, enough to believe you'll come back if this is where you belong." As they held each other in the quiet workshop, surrounded by the evidence of their shared labor and growing life together, Hannah made a silent promise to herself. She would go to Boston, she would face her inheritance and her past, and she would discover once and for all whether Hannah Stoltzfus was who she was meant to be, or just who she had become when she had nowhere else to turn. The answer, she suspected, would determine everything. The morning of Hannah's departure dawned grey and bitter, with the kind of February cold that made every breath visible and turned the Pennsylvania hills into a stark landscape of black trees against white snow. Hannah stood at her bedroom window, looking out at the world she was about to leave, trying to memorize the view of the barn where she had first slept, the workshop where she had learned to shape wood with her hands, the garden that lay dormant beneath the snow, but would bloom again in spring, with or without her there to see it. Her single suitcase sat on the bed, the same battered case she had carried when she arrived, now joined by a newer bag Eli had made for her, crafted from fine leather with brass fittings and her initials burned into the corner. Inside, both bags were clothes Mary and the other women had helped her select for Boston society. Simple but well-made dresses, a warm wool coat, shoes that would be appropriate for lawyers' offices, and inherited properties she couldn't yet imagine. But it was the small wooden box tucked into the handmade bag that mattered most. Inside were the wedding ring Eli had placed on her finger, the simple gold band that had made her legally and spiritually his wife. She couldn't wear it to Boston. Not when she was going as Hannah Wright, heir to Eleanor Pemberton's fortune. Not as Hannah Stoltzfus, Amish wife and community member. The deception felt like tearing off a piece of her skin. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Hannah, the car's here." Eli's voice carried no judgment, no resentment, but Hannah could hear the careful control in it. They had both been walking on eggshells for the past week, treating each other with the exquisite courtesy of people afraid that one wrong word might shatter everything they had built together. She picked up her bags and opened the door to find Eli waiting in the hallway, dressed in his Sunday clothes despite the early hour. He had insisted on riding with her to the train station in Lancaster, though they both knew it would only make the goodbye more difficult. "Ready?" he asked. though the question encompassed far more than whether she had her luggage. "No," Hannah admitted, "but I'm going anyway." The ride to the station was quiet, the hired car's engine the only sound as they passed through the familiar landscape of their shared life. Hannah watched the farms and communities flow past the window, each one representing stability, rootedness, the kind of life she had been learning to build. Now she was heading toward a world of uncertainty, toward questions about identity and belonging that might not have answers she could live with. At the station, Eli carried her bags to the platform where the train to Philadelphia and her connecting flight to Boston waited with industrial patience. Other passengers moved around them with the brisk efficiency of people who traveled frequently, who took for granted the ability to move between worlds without risk of losing themselves in the transition. "The lawyers will meet you at the airport," Eli said, checking the ticket in Hannah's hand for the dozenth time. "John Whitmore himself. Mary spoke to his office, said he's a good man, honest in his dealings." "Eli," Hannah began, then stopped, overwhelmed by everything she wanted to say and the impossibility of saying it in the few minutes they had left. "I know," he said quietly, understanding her struggle. "I know." She wanted to tell him that she loved him more than she had ever loved anything, that the thought of losing him was worse than any fear she had about facing her inheritance. She wanted to promise that she would come back, that nothing she discovered in Boston could change what they had built together. She wanted to give him some assurance that this terrible leap into the unknown wouldn't end with both of them destroyed by the choice to let her go. But promises based on ignorance weren't promises at all, and they both knew it. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. "I made this for you," she said, pressing it into his hands. To remember that I was here, that this was real." Eli unwrapped the package carefully, revealing a small wooden cross that Hannah had carved in secret during the evenings when he was tending to farm chores. The work wasn't perfect, her skill with detail carving was still developing, but every line had been shaped with love and careful attention. "Hannah," he breathed, running his thumb over the smooth surface. "It's beautiful. It's made from wood from your father's workshop. From the same oak he used to build your first cradle." Hannah's voice caught slightly. I wanted you to have something that connected all the generations. Your father, you, and whatever we might have built together if things were different." Eli closed his fingers around the cross and pulled Hannah into his arms, holding her with desperate tenderness, while around them the busy world of travelers and schedules continued its relentless pace. "Come back to me," he whispered against her. "Here, whatever you find there, whatever you learn about yourself, come back to me if this is where your heart belongs." "And if it doesn't?" Hannah asked, voicing the fear that had been eating at her for days. "Then I'll know I was part of helping you find where you do belong, and I'll be grateful for the time we had, the generosity of his love, his willingness to lose her so that she could find herself," made Hannah's chest ache with emotion too large for words. This man, who had offered her safety when she was desperate and love when she was ready to receive it, was now offering her freedom to choose her own path, even when that choice might destroy them both. The train's whistle sounded, and passengers began boarding with the urgency of travelers on schedule. Hannah knew she had to go. The lawyers were expecting her, the legal processes were in motion, and delaying would only make everything more complicated. "I have to," she began. "I know." Eli kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips, in a goodbye that tasted of tears and promises neither of them could make. "Go learn who you really are, Hannah Wright. Find out what Eleanor Pemberton wanted to give you. Then decide what kind of life you want to build." Hannah picked up her bags and walked toward the train, turning back once to see Eli standing on the platform, the wooden cross still clutched in his hand, his eyes following her with love and loss, and hope that made her heart break and soar simultaneously. As the train pulled away from Lancaster County, Hannah pressed her face to the window and watched the Pennsylvania hills disappear into the distance. Somewhere in those hills was a man who loved her enough to let her go, a community that had opened its heart to a stranger, and a life she had built with her own hands from nothing but mutual need and growing affection. Now she was traveling toward a life she had never imagined. Wealth, heritage, the kind of security that money could provide, but that felt empty compared to the security she had found in belonging somewhere, in being known and valued for who she was rather than what she possessed. The questions that had driven her to make this journey swirled in her mind as the landscape outside the window changed from rural Pennsylvania to industrial cities, from the familiar rhythms of agricultural life to the complex machinery of modern American commerce. Who was Eleanor Pemberton? And why had she spent her final years searching for a granddaughter she had never met? What kind of life had she envisioned for Hannah when she structured her will to leave everything to a girl who had grown up in foster care? What did it mean to be a right, to carry a name that apparently came with money and property and expectations Hannah couldn't begin to understand? But beneath all those practical questions lay the deeper one that would determine everything. Who? Was Hannah really? Was she Hannah Wright, heiress to a Boston fortune, destined for a life of privilege she had never known? Or was she Hannah Stoltzfus, Amish wife and community member, called to a life of faith and service and simple joys? Or was it possible to be both, to find a way to honor her inheritance while keeping faith with the love she had found in the most unlikely of places? As the train carried her toward Boston and whatever answers awaited her there, Hannah clutched her own wooden cross, a smaller version of the one she had given Eli, and prayed for wisdom to make the right choices, courage to face whatever truths she discovered, and grace to remain true to her heart, regardless of what complications her newfound wealth might bring. Outside the window, America rushed past in all its complex diversity, and Hannah Wright Stoltzfus traveled toward a reckoning with her past that would determine the shape of her future. Behind her, in a quiet Pennsylvania valley, Eli Stoltzfus stood in his empty workshop and began removing his wedding ring for the first time since he had married Sarah 25 years before. Not because he wanted to forget his commitment to Hannah, but because he understood that real love sometimes required the courage to let go completely, to trust that what was meant to be would find its way back, and that what wasn't meant to be deserved the dignity of an honest farewell. The ring slipped into the small wooden box beside Sarah's ring, and Eli went back to work on the dining table he and Hannah had been finishing together, his hands moving with practiced skill, while his heart held space for whatever was coming next. Boston in February was a city of grey stone and bitter wind, where wealth announced itself in the cut of overcoats and the gleam of luxury cars navigating streets that had been old when America was young. Hannah stood on the sidewalk outside the offices of Whitmore, Patterson and Associates, clutching her coat against the cold and trying to reconcile the woman she had become with the world she was about to enter. John Whitmore proved to be a man. In his 60s, with kind eyes and the sort of understated elegance that spoke of old money and older values. His office looked out over Boston Harbor, where ships moved with purpose through water that carried the weight of centuries. "Miss Wright," he said, rising to greet her with genuine warmth. "Or should I say Mrs. Stoltzfus? I confess, when our investigators finally located you, we were surprised to discover you had married." Hannah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "It's uncomplicated. The best things usually are." Whitmore gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Shall we begin with your grandmother? I think understanding Eleanor will help you understand what she's left you." For the next hour, Hannah learned about a woman she wished desperately she could have known. Eleanor Wright Pemberton had been a force of nature, brilliant, determined, passionate about social justice and education. She had built a fortune through careful investments and business acumen, but she had also given away millions to causes she believed in. She had been married briefly in her 20s, widowed young, and had chosen to focus on her career and philanthropy rather than remarry. She regretted the estrangement from your father terribly, Whitmore explained, sliding a photograph across his desk. This was taken the year before he died, when she hired her first private investigator to try to locate him. Hannah stared at the photograph of a woman in her 70s, silver-haired and elegant, standing in front of a brownstone that radiated prosperity. But it was Eleanor's eyes that caught Hannah's attention, intelligent, determined, and carrying a sadness that spoke of deep regret. What was the fight about? Between her and my father? Whitmore hesitated. Eleanor wanted your father to pursue his education, to make something of himself beyond the manual labor jobs he preferred. She thought she was helping, but he saw it as controlling. When he married your mother against Eleanor's wishes, she thought your mother was after his prospects, not understanding that your father had no prospects beyond what he could earn with his hands. The argument became permanent. The irony wasn't lost on Hannah. Her grandmother had disapproved of her father's choice to work with his hands, to build a simple life based on honest labor. Yet Hannah had found her deepest happiness doing exactly that kind of work, building exactly that kind of life. She spent the last 15 years of her life trying to find you, Whitmore continued. After your father's death, after your mother's death, she became obsessed with locating the granddaughter she had never met. She blamed herself for the estrangement that kept her from knowing your family, but she never found me. You were remarkably good at staying invisible. Changed names several times, moved frequently, avoided creating the kind of paper trail that would have led investigators to you. Eleanor died still searching, still hoping. Hannah absorbed this information, trying to imagine the parallel life, where a lonely old woman had been looking for her while she had been desperately wishing for family, for someone to claim her as their own. The will, Hannah said finally. Why leave everything to someone she'd never met? Whitmore smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. That's where it gets interesting. Eleanor left detailed instructions. She wanted you to have choices she never had, freedom she never experienced, but she also left conditions. Hannah's stomach clenched. What kind of conditions? Nothing onerous. She wanted you to live in her Boston house for 6 months, to experience the life she had built, to understand your heritage. She wanted you to meet with the boards of her charitable foundations, to see the work she had been doing. She wanted you to have time to decide not just whether you wanted her money, but what you wanted to do with it. And if I don't want any of it, then it goes to her charities, as she always intended. But she hoped, she believed, that once you understood what she was offering, you would find ways to use her legacy that honored both your family's past and your own future. Hannah stared out at Boston Harbor, trying to process the magnitude of what she was being offered. Not just money, but purpose. Not just inheritance, but responsibility. Eleanor Pemberton had been trying to give her the resources to build whatever. Some kind of life she chose, including, if she wanted, the life she had already begun building with Eli. There's one more thing, Whitmore said, his voice growing gentle. Eleanor left you a letter. She wrote it 5 years ago, when she first began, to hope she might find you. She updated it regularly, right up until her death. Hannah took the sealed envelope with hands that trembled slightly. Her name was written across the front, in careful script, for my granddaughter Hannah Wright, with all my love and hopes for her future. Take your time, Whitmore said, rising from his desk. I'll give you privacy to read it. When you're ready, we'll discuss the practical arrangements for your stay in Boston. Alone in the lawyer's office, with the busy harbor spread out below her and the weight of inheritance pressing down from above, Hannah opened the letter from the grandmother she had never known and began to read words that would change everything. My dearest Hannah, if you are reading this letter, then the private investigators have finally succeeded in finding you, and I am no longer alive to meet you face to face. I cannot tell you how deeply I regret that we will never have the chance to know each other, to build the relationship I threw away through pride and stubbornness so many years ago. I have spent the last 15 years learning everything I could about you, piecing together the fragments of your life from foster care records, school transcripts, employment records, and the reports of investigators who tracked your movements across the country. What I discovered broke my heart and filled me with admiration in equal measure. You are stronger than I ever was, Hannah. You survived circumstances that would have destroyed weaker spirits. You kept moving forward when staying put would have been easier. You protected yourself when no one else would. You became a woman of courage and resilience. And I am so proud to be your grandmother, but I also know that strength born of necessity can become a prison. I know what it is to trust no one, to depend only on yourself, to build walls so high that love cannot reach you. I spent decades living that way, and I don't want you to make my mistakes. The money I'm leaving you is not charity, and it's not guilt payment for the years we lost. It is freedom. Freedom to choose the life you want rather than the life you've been forced to accept. Whether you use it to build security, to pursue education, to help others, or simply to buy yourself time to discover who you really are, the choice is entirely yours. But I hope, I pray, that you will also use it to open your heart. I hope you will find people worth trusting, causes worth fighting for, love worth risking everything to protect. I hope you will be braver than I was, wiser than I was, more willing to forgive and be forgiven. I know you may have questions about your father, about the estrangement that kept us apart. The truth is simple. I was wrong. I thought I knew what was best for him, thought I could control his life through money and expectations. I lost him because I couldn't accept that his idea of success was different from mine. Don't let anyone, including me through this inheritance, make that mistake with your life. Be who you are, Hannah. Choose what brings you joy. If that means giving away every penny of what I've left you, then do it with my blessing. If it means using the money to build something beautiful and lasting, then know that I am cheering you on from whatever comes after this life. If it means something else entirely, something I cannot imagine from my limited perspective, then trust your heart and know that you have my love and support. You are my granddaughter, but you are also your own person. Honor both truths. With all my love and hopes for your happiness, Eleanor Wright, Pemberton, PS. I have included with my personal effects a box of photographs and letters from your parents. Your father was not the irresponsible man I painted him to be. He was a good person who loved your mother deeply and would have loved you beyond measure. I hope these mementos will help you know them both better. Hannah read the letter 3 times before the words fully penetrated. When they did, she found herself crying, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of being known and loved by someone she had never met. Eleanor had seen her, truly seen her, across the years and miles and missed connections. More than that, she had understood the prison that survival could become and had tried to provide a key. The money wasn't the real inheritance. The freedom to choose, truly choose, without desperation or fear limiting her options, that was Eleanor's gift. Hannah folded the letter carefully and walked to the window overlooking Boston Harbor. Somewhere to the south, Eli was probably working in his shop, finishing the projects they had started together, missing her, but respecting her need to discover who she really was when she had every option available to her for the first time since receiving that first legal letter. Hannah felt the tight knot of anxiety in her chest begin to loosen. Eleanor hadn't been trying to buy her affection or control her choices. She had been trying to give her what she had never had, the luxury of choosing based on love rather than necessity. But what did she love? What brought her joy? What kind of life did Hannah Wright want to build when she could build anything at all? The answer came with surprising clarity. She loved the feel of wood grain beneath her hands. She loved the satisfaction of creating something beautiful and useful. She loved the quiet rhythms of community life, the way neighbors cared for each other without fanfare, the simple grace of sharing meals and seasons and sorrows. She loved waking up next to someone who knew her completely and chose to stay anyway. She loved being Hannah Stoltzfus, even if she had started out as Hannah Wright. Eleanor was right. The inheritance was freedom. And Hannah knew exactly how she wanted to use that freedom. She was going home to Pennsylvania, but first she was going to Boston's most exclusive jewelry store to buy 2 wedding rings, simple bands crafted by the finest artisans in the city. When she returned to Eli, it would be as a woman with choices who had chosen him, not because she needed him for survival, but because she loved him beyond reason and wanted to build a life with him that honored both their dreams. The money would come with her, but not as a burden or a temptation. It would come as a tool for building something beautiful. Better workshops, community programs, maybe a scholarship fund for young people learning trades. Eleanor's legacy would become part of their legacy, woven into the simple, profound life they were creating together. Hannah Stoltzfus was going home. Spring came early to Lancaster County that year, with April bringing warmth that coaxed wildflowers from winter-hard ground and filled the air with the scent of new beginnings. Hannah stood in her garden, their garden, watching Eli work with the patience and precision she had come to love, his hands gentle with seedlings that would feed them through the coming season. It had been 6 weeks since her return from Boston. 6 weeks since the morning she had appeared at the workshop door, with tears in her eyes and wedding rings in her hand, asking if a woman with choices could still choose the man she loved. Eli had dropped the plane he was holding and kissed her until they were both breathless, and then they had talked through the night about everything she had learned, everything she had inherited, and everything they wanted to build together. Money was there, not as a burden or a transformation, but as a tool. They had used some of it to expand the workshop, to buy better tools and equipment that would let Eli take on larger commissions. More had gone into a fund for young people in the community who wanted to learn trades, and a significant portion had been donated to Eleanor's favorite charities. The rest sat quietly in investments, providing security without changing the essential nature of their life together. "Hannah," Eli called from across the garden. "Come see this." She walked over to where he knelt beside a small wooden cradle, its sides carved with the same intricate patterns that decorated Sarah's quilt. The wood was local maple, finished to a warm golden gleam that would deepen with age. "It's beautiful," Hannah said, running her fingers along the smooth curves. "Who commissioned it?" Eli looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite. A reed, hope mixed with uncertainty, love tempered with careful respect for her autonomy. "I was hoping we might have use for it ourselves." The words hung between them, weighted with all the conversations they had been having about their future, about what kind of life they wanted to build now that building it was truly a choice rather than a necessity. "Eli Stoltzfus," Hannah said, kneeling beside him in the soft earth of their garden. "Are you asking me if I want to have children with you? I'm asking if you want to have a family with me. If you want to fill this house with the sound of children's voices. If you want to teach little hands to work wood and tend gardens and find joy in simple things." Hannah thought of Eleanor's letter, still kept in the small wooden box on her dresser alongside her grandmother's photographs and her parents' wedding rings. "Be who you are, Hannah. Choose what brings you joy." What brought her joy was this quiet man with gentle hands and patient heart, this community that had opened its arms to a stranger, this life built on love, deliberately chosen and carefully tended. "Yes," she said, and watched joy transform Eli's face like sunrise. "Yes to all of it, to children and laughter and teaching small hands to create beautiful things, to growing old together in this place we've made our own." Eli kissed her then, his hands framing her face as if she were something precious beyond measure. Around them, spring continued its ancient work of renewal, and Hannah felt the last pieces of her identity settling into place. She was Hannah Wright, Eleanor Pemberton's granddaughter, heir to a legacy of strength and determination. She was also Hannah Stoltzfus, Amish wife and community member, craftsman and gardener, and woman learning to trust in love that was chosen, rather than required. But most of all, she was simply Hannah, someone who had found her place in the world not by accident or desperation, but by the daily choice to build something beautiful with someone who loved her exactly as she was. That evening, as they sat on their front porch and watched the sun set over the Pennsylvania hills, Hannah told Eli about the letter she had written to Eleanor's lawyer, formally accepting the inheritance but establishing the charitable foundation that would ensure most of the money went toward helping other young people who needed second chances. She would have liked that, Eli said, his arm around Hannah's shoulders as they rocked gently in the swing he had built for their first anniversary. Using her gift to give others the freedom to choose. I keep thinking about the timing, Hannah mused. If I had found the inheritance 5 years ago, when I was still running, still afraid, I might have used it to disappear completely, to build walls so high that no one could ever hurt me again. But you found it when you were ready to use it. For love instead of fear. Hannah nodded, thinking of all the seemingly random events that had brought her to this moment. The foster placements that had taught her resilience, the relationship with Marcus that had taught her to recognize genuine kindness, the desperation that had driven her to Eli's barn, and yes, even Eleanor's fortune that had given her the confidence to choose love freely rather than accept it gratefully. Do you think that's how it works? She asked. Do you think we get what we need when we're ready to receive it properly? Eli considered this with the thoughtful attention he brought to questions of faith and purpose. I think sometimes God works through circumstances we can't understand at the time. I think your grandmother was part of bringing you here, even though she never knew where here would be. Inside the house, the cradle sat waiting in what would soon be a nursery, surrounded by furniture they had made with their own hands, and love they had built through daily choice and patient dedication. It was a simple room in a simple house, but it was theirs in the deepest sense, not just legally or financially, but emotionally and spiritually. As darkness settled over their valley and the first stars appeared in the clear sky, Hannah reflected on the strange journey that had brought her from sleeping behind barns to sitting on her own front porch, from running from love to running toward it, from surviving to thriving. She had told Eli once that she needed a home, and he needed a wife. It had been true then as far as it went, but what they had discovered was that the deepest human needs, for love, for belonging, for purpose, for the freedom to become who they were meant to be, could only be met when they were freely chosen. Rather than desperately accepted, Hannah Stoltzfus closed her eyes and listened to the night sounds of her Pennsylvania home, owls calling across the valley, the distant lowing of cattle, the whisper of wind through trees that had stood here, long before she arrived and would stand long after she was gone. But she would leave her mark on this place, she and Eli together, in the children they would raise, the furniture they would build, the love they would share with a community that had opened its heart to a stranger and made her family. Sometimes the most broken hearts do find their way to each other when they need it most. Sometimes practical arrangements become profound love stories. Sometimes saying, "I need a wife and you need a home," is just another way of saying, "I choose you, and I hope you'll choose me too." And sometimes that's enough to build a lifetime. On had built together was so much more than the fulfillment of practical needs. They had built a partnership based on respect and daily choice, a love that grew stronger because it was freely given rather than desperately grasped, and a life that honored both the simple joys of the present and the hard-won wisdom of the past.